Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's time once again for another Curating Your Movie Library segment, which means I'm delighted to welcome on my precious wife, the one who sits across the aisle with me at the drive-in. Sweetheart, thank you for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Well, we're going to do, again today, not a movie, but actually a television program that we have started streaming, and I thought it would be a good thing to cover because it, to me, is a great victory, because I love when I'm able to find something that's got a lot to it, got a lot of episodes that you actually enjoy. And this is one of those. We just started it, a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we've been going through it pretty fast, but happily there's 7 seasons. And we're talking today about a program called The Mentalist. Now, I know not to ask my precious wife to give us a basic rundown
Johnny on the spot
of the theme or the context of this show, so I'm gonna do that. But if I miss something, and if there's anything you want to add, please feel free to interrupt me, my love.
I sure will.
Okay. Well, The Mentalist is a TV show about a group of police who work for the California Bureau of Investigation. There's a team of 5, and one of those 5 is actually not a detective, but it is a former entertainer who entertained through pretending to be a psychic. That character, his name is Patrick Jane, and it's played by Simon Baker, who has been in other things, but I've never actually seen him in anything else.
I was going to ask you, what else has he been in?
I've actually seen him advertised in movies that are, I'm scrolling through looking for a movie. Mm-hmm. But he is just a real charmer. And a big part of the show is him using his skill set to solve the crimes. In fact, that's why he was hired on this team as a consultant, because they realize his skill set could come in handy. Not the skill set of, actually as a psychic figuring out where someone who's been taken hostage is being kept, mm-hmm. but rather the skill set of getting people to reveal things that they don't necessarily want to reveal. So there's a lot of battles of wits in this show, sometimes with people who are aware that's going on, sometimes not. It's also one of those programs that does something relatively new, to me anyway. Maybe it's not. I guess it was part of The Fugitive as well. But it's a series that not only has a arc for a particular episode, but also has a long arc. And by arc, we simply mean the presentation of a problem and the attempts to find the solution to the problem. And so there is a long arc that pretty much runs through the whole of this show. The reason that Patrick Jane comes and serves in this role is because he is intent on helping to track down a serial killer who actually killed his wife and his daughter. And so that pursuit, they do the similar kind of thing in Monk, where Monk is looking for his wife's killer. Again, they did it in The Fugitive. In some sense, they did it in Lost, although the conclusion of the arc got lost on Lost. And in this particular show, we also get the blessing of watching the other characters. And it has something that I think is really overlooked in what makes for good television. I mean, it is hard to find the home run premise that's really going to grab people and define the star who's really going to carry the show. But it is also really, really important to get the right supporting characters. You think about how much the Andy Griffith Show lost when Barney left. Mm-hmm. Well, in this context, it's the other characters on the team that are just such a fun part of the show. There's a romance between one of the detectives who... Lisa and I do this all the time. One of our observations about people is, they look like a cartoon. And that's true of this one detective who not only looks like a cartoon in general, he looks very much like
Mr. Incredible.
Mr. Incredible, yeah. And he's really fun. But my favorite character is just this radically deadpan detective who is just so steady, so cool, so calm. His name is Kimball Cho. And he actually, the actor who plays Kimball Cho, is on a new series of some sort. I think maybe Simon Baker is as well. I'm not sure. Ever since streaming, I really don't keep up with new shows very much at all. But Kimball Cho is just like my favorite character in the same way that Floyd the Barber is my favorite character on the Andy Griffith Show. And it's just because his shtick is just so much fun. I mean, he's just... People get...
Straight face.
Yes, and people get frantic and intense, and he's just like...
Blah, 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 blah. Here's the answers. Ex-gang member.
Yeah. Yeah. And you get some backstory on some of these folks.
I think only one episode so far we've actually seen him in an emotional position where he's weeping. And it breaks down that facade of straight face, straight-laced, no emotion. He is literally no emotion.
Yes. And
which was what makes him so fun.
Yeah, and they stick with it, which is good. Mm-hmm. A lot of times shows will sort of play off the softening of those kind of guys. And they had that one episode, but he sticks with it. You also have, I'm hesitant to admit it, but I will. Not only do we enjoy the solving of the mysteries, the use of Patrick Jane's insights on how to get that done, but there is the interest of at least two potential romances among the characters, where we wonder what's going to happen. And there's that whole moonlighting Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis thing going on between Patrick Jane and the head of the team, Teresa Lisbon. And then, of course, Mr. Incredible is interested in the other girl on the team. Yes. Well,
Van Pelt.
Yes, Van Pelt. So, and again, what's interesting to me finally about we got to hurry, but it is a cozy. It is a murder mystery where they're not really interested in showing you the gruesomeness of the crime. It usually happens off screen, like an Agatha Christie kind of story, and so it's not too intense that way.
Right, like a thriller.
Yeah, and so I really commend it to folks. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. You gotta watch it. It's so good.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things to watch when we wind down. After we watch a movie or something, we'll get our minds posted back with The Mentalist. But just the gentleness of the characters, and it's relaxing.
It is.
It's fun and
it's on Prime right now. So check it out, The Mentalist. And again, as always, let us know what you think. Sweetheart, thank you for being with me.
I'm reading your mind right now.
You are.
Mm-hmm. We're done.
As you are listening, God willing, we're just 2 days away from the very first public meeting for worship of Sovereign Grace Fellowship. If you've been listening regularly to the podcast, you know we're very excited about this, eager for it, and determined to try to keep people on the Jesus Changes Everything podcast up to date on what's happening. So here we are, 2 days away. And one of the things I wanted to make sure we understood, that I wanted to make very clear, is this. I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which has, among its nicknames, it is often called the city of churches. But I want to be clear. I want us all to understand that the reason Sovereign Grace Fellowship is about to start is not because Fort Wayne is a city bereft of churches or bereft of sound churches. In fact, Sovereign Grace Fellowship is under the umbrella of Dunamis Fellowship, which has on its board 3 other pastors from here in the city of Fort Wayne, including Jamie Hart, pastor of Redeemer Church here in town, Jason Bowerly, pastor of Christ Our Treasure, and Pastor Mike Drury, who is our pastor at Pine Hills Church. So why would we do this when we're and affirming that there are already good churches in town? And by the way, these are not the only 3. It's true that Lisa and I, over the course of the first year and a half that we were married, we visited churches all across town until we found our way to Pine Hills Church. And we did have a little bit of a challenge finding where we wanted to be. But again, there are other legitimate, faithful churches in town. So why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because there's always room for more. We're doing this for the same reason that every other church has ever started in this town. No church that ever started in this town, I suspect, at least in the last 200 years, did so on the basis of, hey, there's no legitimate church here in town. There's a perfectly legitimate middle ground between saying, well, no secondary distinctives matter and therefore there should be no more churches, and taking the position that all secondary distinctives are of infinite importance and therefore we should be planting churches. Neither one of those are legitimate options. We're not doing this because we're dissatisfied. We're doing this because we want to fulfill the calling of the church. We want to fulfill the Great Commission. Both parts of the Great Commission, that is, proclaiming the name of Christ over all things and also making disciples. That's part of what Sovereign Grace Fellowship is all about. And we do believe that there are better ways of doing this and not as good ways of doing this. And we think that a church that faithfully preaches the gospel, that weekly celebrates the Lord's Supper, that builds relationships among members, that worships together as families, that these things are valuable things. Things that can help, things that are, again, in the Bible. I'm not saying that those who disagree are bad people. I am saying we want people to be able. I've said it this way when I ended up joining Pine Hills Church. I want to be in a church where every week I am reminded that I'm a sinner, that Jesus died for sinners, and that my Heavenly Father loves me. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Do you have any idea how precious that is? My hope and my prayers, we're again 2 days away from starting. I want to see relationships built. I want to see, for me and everyone here, I want to see an increase in zeal and passion for the things of God. I want to see Jesus glorified. That's why we're doing this. Now, you are going to be welcome to tune in. I suspect we'll probably broadcast our service over Facebook Live, probably at RC-Lisa Sproul. We may get a Sovereign Grace Fellowship page up before then, but you'll be welcome to join us or to watch after the fact. And as always, we are always welcoming feedback. We don't want to be an echo chamber. We don't want to be only listening to ourselves. So if you've got feedback, we would love to hear from you. If you want to support the work of this church, we would love to hear from you. If you're nearby and want to be a part of this church, we'd love to hear from you. What we don't want is people not being a part of a local church and only being a part of a distant church. You are welcome to join us. But if you're not near us, if you're not able to come and fellowship with us face to face, then you need to find someplace you can. And if you can't, then you're probably, can't promise, but probably being a little too grumpy and narrow. I hope we'll see some of you here. I hope we'll see some of you over the internet. And I hope each one of you is a faithful member of a local church. There is, in a rather small subsection of the Reformed world, a rather curious conviction. Some otherwise sound folks take the true and sound notion that because God knows those whom he has not chosen, because it is a great sin against God to not give thanks to God, that it is wrong to speak of God being gracious to those who were not chosen. Every time he sends them rain and they fail to give him thanks, all that happens for those not chosen is that the thermostat in hell goes up higher still. These folks are right. God does send the rain, knowing they will not give thanks. He will heat up hell all the hotter because of it. But, contra this peculiar view, the rain is in fact grace. In fact, if it's not grace, the very conclusion we've reached, that they will receive greater judgment for their lack of thanksgiving, makes no sense. If God is in fact not being gracious toward those who are not his own, why should they give thanks? You can't have it both ways. You can deny that God is giving the reprobate unmerited or demerited favor, or you can affirm the reprobate has a duty to give thanks. But you can't do both. There is, on the other hand, in the whole of the Reformed world, a curious lack of conviction. That is, somehow we have come to forget that we too are the recipients of his grace, that we receive so much better than what we deserve, and that we have a solemn duty to joyfully give thanks. One of the ways this broader failure manifests itself is in what some might call the objection to, quote, worm theology. Worm theology is that pejorative term given to those of us who are eager to affirm the biblical reality of two things. First, we are by nature children of wrath. We're born the enemies of God. We are totally depraved. We would, in our natural state, if we could, commit deicide. Second, when we're given new hearts and we embrace the work of Christ, as we grow in grace moving toward our glorification, we have sin yet remaining in us. It is true, gloriously true, that when we embrace the work of Christ on our behalf, we have peace with God. The Spirit indwells us. We are made new and are deemed righteous by the Father, who adopts us as his own children. We are promised eternal joy at his right hand, and that one day all the remnants of our sin will be washed away. We are promised that every sin, past, present, future, has already been covered by the blood of Christ. We become saints, beloved of Christ. None of which changes the truth that until our deaths, our glorifications, we still sin, often in the most grievous ways. We are still in ourselves worthy of his just wrath, of his displeasure. The challenge is to keep all these truths in their proper places. Where we are in danger of doubting his tender love for us, we must needs remember that he moves us from grace to grace, that all his promises are yea and amen, that he allows us to be called his children. When, however, we are in danger of believing we deserve all the good that we receive, we need to remember our true nature, what we are apart from his grace. We should never despair of what we are, because we are already his and are being remade. We should never demand what we haven't been given, because we're still sinners and are always already living in the very lap of his grace. I've noticed in recent years a great upsurge in objections to the objective truth to what we are. Any time I speak of the believer as a sinner, let alone a miserable sinner, I can always count on someone to come along behind and chasten me for forgetting how God sees us. They will, happily, often do so by reminding me of the great truths of the gospel. But one thing the gospel doesn't do is make our sin disappear on this side of the veil. It doesn't make us incapable of this sin or that, with the exception of blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. If we define sinner simply as one who sins, then it doesn't cause us to cease being sinners. And it certainly doesn't mean that we're removed from our calling to recognize and give thanks for his mercy. When we get ahead of ourselves, when we start to think not that we are deemed fine fellows by our Maker due to the life and death of his Son for us, but think instead that we are fine fellows in ourselves, we lose sight of the marvel of mercy. We forget not only to give thanks for the redemption of our souls, but for the preservation of our bodies. We forget not only to give thanks for the goodness in our lives and all the things that give us pleasure, but for the goodness in our lives and all the things that give us pain. In short, when we miss the sin, we miss the mercy. When we forget what we are due, we forget all that we have been given. We forget we are sinners. We forget to give thanks for his mercy precisely because we are still sinners. We preach this truth not to beat us down, but that we would look up. Jesus told us that the man who beat his breast, crying, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner," went to his home justified. He went home then joyful, thankful. He did not, however, from that moment forward, never again beat his breast. He did not, from that moment forward, never again cry out to God, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner." But each time he returned to pray, he prayed the same prayer and went home with the same joy. If we would remember the joy of our salvation, we must needs remember the sorrow of our damnation. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.